back to Beauty Beyond Betrayal. I am really excited about today's broadcast. First off, I've got my sidekick with me
Yes,
today.
you do.
Well, I have the hubby with me in the house, and this is very far and few between, but you're going to hear more from him. So
Oh, yeah.
why not bring him in now? But really, the ones that we're excited about is we have Katie and Michael in the house. And they have one of the most amazing stories of redemption, really going from brokenness to breakthrough, and how God just breathed life into what they really thought was dead at one point. They thought even beyond redemption. And I remember some of that, and just to see where they are today is a miracle. And really, anytime we have a couple that has been restored, has chosen to take the harder path of restoration, that is a miracle from God. So I cannot wait to dive into their story. So, Michael, Katie, so we are excited to have you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
excited to be
Yeah,
here.
this is real exciting. We're not nervous. We're not going to be nervous. We're just going to have a really good time today and allow God to just do what God does during our time on Beauty Beyond Betrayal. So, you know, I have had the privilege to walk with y'all now for a little while and just see God do so much in your life. And I really want you to share with our audience by just starting at the point of, what was it like for you guys in the beginning when there was this early D-Day that kind of happened? I want you to take us back to that moment when you first found out about betrayal. And really, when you talk about the betrayal, please share with the audience like what the betrayal was. We talk about sexual addiction and affairs on this station. So, what was it like when it was exposed? And I'd love to hear really both of your sides.
Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, well,
Let's start with
oh, good. Yeah, well, like any couple, I think, we got married, we met in seminary, and we felt called into ministry together. And like any couple, started out just bright-eyed and yay, we're gonna do this. And Michael had shared a little bit. He'd said, oh, I watched some porn when I was in college, but it kind of like any in love 23, 24-year-old, I didn't think anything much of it. He didn't share much else of it. And we just went on and got married, and we were on the mission field. We had kids. We came back to the States to pastor a church after 10 years overseas. And one day I was getting ready for church, and Michael had already gone, and I got a call saying, oh, honey, don't come in today. I'm on my way home, and I'll let you know what's going on. You want to take it?
Yeah, and so I had showed up to church that morning to start a service. We were doing some different things for our summer service set, and two of the elders walked in to the church, and I wasn't expecting either of them for that service. And they said, "Hey, we need to talk," and they confronted me that they'd found pornographic pictures on the church computer, and so I. Was cornered, and so confessed only to what I was caught doing. They obviously said, "Hey, we're going to cancel service today. You go home. We've got to figure this whole thing out." So I went home and told Katie what had happened, but again, just confessed what had been found out, what I'd gotten caught doing. I underplayed it definitely with regards to it was 2 times. And just because of the stress I was under and all of these sorts of things, had plenty of excuses, underplayed what was going on with regards to the full content of what was really happening, but was as much as possible, I suppose, in one sense, for where I was at that time, committed to trying to to make things work, and getting into counseling and getting into group therapy and porn addiction group and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But in all of that process, again, my hope of as an addict, the worst fear, right, is the fear of rejection, the fear of being found out and then being rejected. And so my hope in all of that, if you will, was to find healing with the minimal amount of discovery.
Yeah.
And so that was really where I kind of was focusing on as we sort of move forward from there.
And from my perspective, I had my world just kind of fall out from under me. We'd only been back in the States for about 9 or 10 months. And now we were basically kind of kicked out of the church. My husband doesn't have a job. I've uprooted my entire family from everything they knew and loved. And I didn't know which end was up, but I went back and forth of, do I blame the church or do I blame Michael? Like, I'm feeling whatever. And in the midst of it, I got blamed partly for his using porn. So that heaped a whole bunch more shame on me. And, but we just dug in and did the work and did couples therapy and tried to just keep going. And we did, and we recovered. And a few years later, maybe 4 or 5 years later, I found a burner phone with some chat stuff on it. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And I confronted him and he confessed. And at that point, I was just like, I think part of me just shut down. It was too much for my brain to handle. But he was back in therapy, back in men's accountability. We're okay, you know, we're going to do this. And I remember writing Bible verses all over the shower walls and keeping my mind focused on the word, on the word, on the word, over and over and through all of these times. And things get better. And 2 or 3 years later, another thing drops. What? You know, then we moved. A couple years later, another thing drops. And another year or 2 goes by, and then one more thing does up. And this whole time I'm kind of believing him of, well, it's just been the last month, or it's just been a little bit. It's just been a little bit. And it's just because of the stress, and I don't know, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And every time it kept growing until I finally kind of got to the place where, when we were looking at empty nest, of saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of this. Yeah. And then we moved here to South Carolina in March of 2022. And we're already excited. There's a fresh start. We found a great church. We found lots of people. And Michael got involved in a recovery group. And I was like, this is great. You know, this is wonderful. We're feeling, I'm coming back to life. We're feeling good about stuff. And one day I was away at a coaching convention in July. And Michael had been home here in South Carolina for 3 days or so. And I get this text message, hey, when you're done with dinner, give me a call. And called him when I got back to the hotel. But then he said, hey, put it on, you know, let's do this on FaceTime, which was kind of odd, not normal, but I was like, okay. And then he kind of dropped another big bomb on me. And that was when I feel like every time things had happened before, it was kind of like one floor of the house just sort of crashed a little bit, and a little bit came out, a little bit came out, a little bit came out. And this time I felt like that whole house just came crashing down. There was nothing but I'm standing in rubble going, what on earth happened? So I don't know if you want to share what you shared, but
well, yeah, and so as I said earlier, I think with over the years, right, one of the things of me being caught in addiction was for me, you know, those questions of do I have what it takes? Am I really a man? Am I strong enough? Am I loved? And that was, obviously the what I turned to for comfort, for medicating, for trying to forget everything, that all of the doubts, all of the lies, all of the fears that I had. And so anytime it would come up, and obviously I always felt huge remorse about it. I always felt very guilty, a lot of shame about it in my own life, going back into my whole story of how that all even started. A lot of questions about masculinity that manifested itself in some same-sex attraction and curiosity, and so there was that complicating everything as well, and just so all of that. So anytime it would come out, again, it was just that driving fear of, if she really knows the full truth, there's no way she can accept me. There's no way she can forgive me. There's no way anyone can. My theology was pretty solidly set that I knew God forgave me, but it was also something that I've realized now over the years is that, but he had no choice, right? Because he's God, he has to forgive. Christ's blood covered it. And so he's got no choice. If he had a choice, he wouldn't. And so it was that sense of, even that sense of, God forgave me, but he did not love me. He didn't delight in me, right? And so there's always that fear. So anytime something came up, the best I could hope for was to confess enough, to get more counseling, to get into some groups, and again, try to get that healing without the full disclosure.
Yeah. And so what happened is he calls me up and confessed to having been like basically sexting somebody and getting blackmailed or something. And I'm in Franklin, Tennessee, and he's in here in South Carolina. And I was just like, this is it. I'm done. And came back from, I just drove that whole 8 hours, and my mind was just, all I could do was pray. And I had like the stereo blasting up, and I'm like listening to worship music the whole time. And I'm just like, shout to the Lord, all the earth, let it hear. So I was like, Lord, I was like, my Jesus, you're a strong tower, and I was just like praying and praising and praying and praising at the top of my lungs that whole drive home. And I did call a couple really good friends who'd known some of the struggles. But even when I got back, I went first to the beach, and I took a long walk on the beach before I could go back in to the apartment and actually face Michael. We actually just put in an offer on a house. I remember clearly saying, I am done. I cannot go through this again. And I came back and I saw how broken he was. But I also knew how broke I was. And I basically just told him, I was like, you have to fight your demons. I can't do this. I can't keep fighting. And it's not, you don't get a hall pass. It's not junior high. I'm not your mom. I can't get you out of anything. Like, you have to turn around and face it and deal with your crap and decide to fight, or I am done. I was like, I'll stand behind you if you really are going to do it, but I can't, no more. There's just no more. Like, you have to stand up, and you have to turn, and you have to fight, and you have to deal with it, because I am so done. So, and then you did.
Michael, let me ask you a question, Michael. So when you, the very last time, kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak, right? When you came clean to her and told her, what were your first thoughts and fears initially?
That she would dump me, she would leave me. So and even in this situation, after she found out about this, in this blackmail situation, she basically said, why should I stay with you? Why should we continue? Why should we, like I said, like she said, we were just about to buy a whole house. Why should we go through this? And I said, I will do everything I could. And I signed a contract that said, if I mess up again, everything's hers. I'll take my clothes and that's it, that she gets full everything, to show her how committed I was to trying to find healing. But even in that, I was still holding back the full truth. And it was another couple months where because I thought I could do it. I thought if I put enough pressure on me, I could do it. And it wasn't for a couple months later that then I slipped and I was like, oh, I can't tell her, I'm dead otherwise. And then this notion of learning about full disclosure, followed by a polygraph to make sure it was all came out. And that we started talking about that. And I was like, I might as well just leave. There's no way. And I almost did. I almost just left. I was contemplating suicide just because it's like, why put her through the pain? Because she's going to divorce me anyway. So I might as well just leave. But then the Lord really spoke to me and said that this was my chance to really find freedom. And even if she left me, this was my ticket out to find freedom from all of this. And so I didn't think I didn't I did not even think she would be able to forever forgive me, but I know I needed it for my own sake and for my own freedom. And
Yeah,
so I went forward
that
and did a
takes
full
me into
disclosure.
that takes me into the question that I wanted to ask of, how did your faith play a role in the early days of this final devastation where you're like, I'm faced with full disclosure, like this is real, it's going to be laid out, everything's going to be exposed. What, where was your faith in all of this?
I mean, for me, that it's what sustained me, because it was that whole sense of I really knew that it was like if I didn't do this, I needed to come clean. That I would probably cross that line of whatever apostasy is, and where there is no more forgiveness afterwards. That I was on teetering on that edge, just because it was just that, like I said, pure despair, even to the point of suicide. And it was like, so this was that breaking point that just said, okay, Lord, I'm going to trust you finally fully with my life. And I'm going to give up control. I'm going to stop trying to manipulate it, stop trying to put a nice shine on it all. I'm just going to lay it out there and let's see if you're really big enough to redeem this pile of crud that's called Michael. And so I just really began to press into him, and he began to show me how much freedom there is. Even in writing the disclosure before I ever did it, I started to feel so much more light in just having written it on paper and then starting to share it with my counselor and some accountability partners. And so there was that, it became this point of where part of me is like, again, I'm fearing obviously the devastation of the full disclosure, but the other part of me was like, man, I can't wait to finally get this out. And so just walking through that and just trusting God to do something with it.
Yep.
I hear
For
that
my,
when couples say, I'm dreading, and the statistics are that, usually around 93% of couples want to go through full disclosure, but also are fearful of what they'll find out during full disclosure. But then the statistic afterwards is 97% of couples that go through full disclosure are grateful that they did, because full disclosure is one of those things that is kind of like the laying of a foundation of truth to reestablish it, so that should the couple choose to move forward and build a brand new relationship on the other side of this betrayal, you have that first layer. You have that foundation of truth so that you can start to build over again. And I like to say build over instead of rebuild, because as you both know, the marriage itself and what you had prior to is no more. The vows were broken, everything was completely dead. You have to grieve it, bury it. And now we have to build something brand new. It's kind of like, both Britt and I, we had to start over. We had to rebuild in order,
Yeah, that trust was just gone, she couldn't
yeah,
trust me to walk out the door. And it took time. My actions really helped the
Mhm.
situation. letting her know that, you know, whatever she wanted me to do or show her with my phone or anything like that,
Mhm.
that, you know, I was gonna, you know, do anything because I
Yeah.
wanted her back, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you, Katie, too, the same thing is, where were you with God? Because a lot
Yeah.
of times women, I see both sides, right? Sometimes I'll see women go, I am so angry with God. God could have stopped this. He's sovereign. Why did he allow this? Where was he for me? Why did I have to be the martyr? And then I see
Mhm.
some women go, no, I ran with everything I was into the arms of Jesus. What about you?
I would say definitely the second one, even from way back when, 20 years earlier, it had started. And one of the things that I'm so thankful for is I had a long history of Bible memory. And I can remember driving in the dark to work and just, you know, the verses, I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, and holding on to those promises and holding on time and time again, for without faith, it's impossible to please God. For whoever believes that God is must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And so many times I found myself going, God, why so long though? Why so long? And it'd be like, sometimes I think, well, how long was Joseph in the prison? And I was like, well, I've passed that up now, I'm into like decade 2 here, and then it was like, well, I haven't hit the 40 years in the wilderness yet. So, but there were times when, I definitely hid myself in God. I definitely journaled like crazy. I, you know, took my dogs on long walks. For a long time, I really couldn't share stuff with anybody because I was still living with that shame that had been put on me by that church early on, that this was part of my fault. If I wasn't so pretty, or if I wasn't so this, or I wasn't so that, I drove Michael to pornography. And that was a shame that I carried for a long, long time, and made it feel like I couldn't talk to anybody
Yeah.
about this. And I didn't have anyone to talk to until we moved here to South Carolina. And I think that was definitely part of God's plan of pulling us out of the wilderness and putting us in a community of support. Michael
Yeah.
finally had guys that he was starting to be honest with. And I had these women, you being one of them, Lisa, and another friend of ours, who were like, hey, you know what? This is traumatic. This is actually trauma. And no, you weren't to blame. And for the first time in 20 years, I heard it wasn't my fault. And I heard this thing about PTSD and betrayal trauma, and the years of the dropping of the foot started to make sense of how my personality had shifted, how I had changed and shifted. So that fall, after like the big disc drop that summer, I'm learning more and more about that, and pressing in and saying, you know what, I'd done a lot of self-work, but I gotten to a point even before we moved out here where it was like, I have God and I know I'm going to be okay. Whatever happens with Michael, whatever happens with our marriage, I love him, but I can't stay with this like this anymore.
Yeah.
So I just had to trust, but there definitely was a lot of anger that I had to work through after we went through the full
Oh,
disclosure.
sure. Sure.
You
So
can,
let me ask you this, Katie, for you, what were the support systems that you found were so beneficial when you started really, after all of this, we hit full disclosure, all of this, you're learning about betrayal trauma, you're learning about all these things. what were the things that you were able to plug into that you were like, wow, this is what I needed?
Well, for one thing, we were in a healthy church. So being able to go to church every Sunday and really worship with other people. So I didn't feel quite as isolated as I had when we lived elsewhere. But I think having a couple friends, before the full disclosure, I'd talked to our women's pastor, another assistant pastor. I talked to, and then a good friend of mine who'd introduced me to all of this whole idea of betrayal trauma, and that I'd had them pray for me before, after. I'd been going through this course that laid out, how do you do a full disclosure? What is it? Where do you do? Like the first time I heard of it, I was like, you got to do that. Your marriage is over anyway. Forget it. And my friend says, well, we did that. And then I realized I cannot go on. I don't believe a word he says. We have to do this full disclosure, and I have to have a polygraph, because otherwise I've been lied to too many times. I was like, I'm done. Like, I need to know it. I need to know all of it. And I need it verified by a polygraph. But what that enabled me to do, and I would have not had no idea about any of that if I hadn't had the support of a friend, of a small group that worked with betrayal trauma. I wouldn't have had any idea that those tools existed. So not only did they help me get the tools that eventually led to our freedom, but they gave us the support and the prayer covering and the people to walk beside us in the midst of that and
Yeah.
through that process.
Yeah.
So
Michael,
absolutely indispensable.
yeah. Michael, what about you? What did you do and what did you find worked for you? Now, we always talk about um, there's two really good things that have to happen in order for a person to be set free. And that's crucifixion of the flesh and that's heart transformation, right?
Mhm.
A lot of times in society, unfortunately, they run it really hard on behavior modification, right? Let's just whip it to death. Let's whip you into shape, right? That's what they beat into us. But we know that just trying to crucify the flesh is not going to suffice. We know that there has to be that heart transformation that only God can do, right? But where did God take you? What support systems did he plug in for you that started to map out that freedom?
Yeah, I think I think for me it was, again, much along the lines of just the community of, particularly of other men that were going through similar things, with an ethos at the church of being real and confession, along with repentance, not just repentance. That's another thing we kind of want to just jump into. So, okay, I'm going to change and then not confess it all, and then just change maybe a little bit. But so I got involved with a couple different men's ministries, a men's hike ministry, an accountability ministry, with regards to sexual addiction recovery, that was really stressing both the full, honest, sort of confession of what's going on, and but the most important one was looking at the past wounds that drove some of that behavior. Because again, like what you were saying, I think so much of what I had dealt with before was more the behavior modification. Put the blocks on your website, snap your wrist with a rubber band every time you have a nasty thought, all these kinds of behavior modification things that just, that one, don't work because it's not addressing the deeper issue of the pain that's leading to that. And so it was, and so that was the thing, as I dug deeper into what were the pain issues that were causing me to want to run away, causing me to want to medicate, causing me to want to hide. That as I started to deal with those, then it was like, okay, I have to then start dealing with the pain of what I had done, to myself and to our marriage and to Katie, through the sexual addiction and everything. And so being able to then start to confess it. Two things, like in the sort of the sexual addiction recovery course that I was taking. One, there was a quote that says, "There is no public healing for a secret sin." You've got to publicly confess it. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because that was what I was trying to do. And then the other one was the challenge to say, hey, don't don't run from the temptation when you feel like, hey, I want to go act out, when I want to go use. Don't run from it, but safely ask, what is it that I'm really looking for? Because it's not the pseudo thing. It's what's that pain? And so both of those were really, really helpful, and in that community to be able to say, hey, let's address these issues. And then in that community of hearing other guys being really vulnerable and very honest, where again, even for a while, I was still lying, gave my full disclosure to them the first time, and it was not even a third of a fourth of what, and to then go back and say, hey, I'm sorry, I lied to you guys. And then to start to really be honest and just have that accepting, the grace with the truth.
Yeah.
And so many other groups just have that grace. Oh, it's okay. Oh, hey, we all do it, to say, no, we all do it, but no, you don't have to. And, let's be real and add that truth. So I think that was really critical in the communities that I was able to find.
When I
What
think,
do
oh, I was
Go
gonna
ahead,
say,
Kate.
you talked about having a choice too, of like your realization of,
Well, yeah, and then eventually,
Yeah.
with regards to the recovery side of saying, yeah, no, I'm not the victim. I'm not powerless in this, right? That whole notion of, well, I'm an addict, so I'm going to do it,
Right.
and say, no, I'm not an addict. I'm not defined by the behaviors, and it is a choice, and that but I need the healthy patterns to be able to make the right choice.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I say that quite often on this podcast. Once an addict, always an addict. Once a cheater, always a cheater is not the identity of a child of God.
amen.
It is not. And those who say, well, we will always, forever and amen, be an addict that is fighting this, they are actually placing an identity upon you, and it does keep you in bondage. And
Yes.
Jesus came that we would be set free
Yeah.
from anything that would bind us. He died for that sin. And so for those of us who truly go to him, like you said, fully repent, right?
Fully.
And truly crucify that flesh, God begins to truly transform a heart. And I see it day in and day out, and it's one of the most beautiful things when you see that the temporary pleasure of sin becomes so distasteful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, what we used to gravitate to now becomes the sourness that we run from. And we say, no, 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 I want to run to the honey of God, and I want to be here. There's nothing that compares to the freedom that he brings to me, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm glad that you brought that up. So with that said, then what do you believe, Michael, was the turning point for you to truly surrender and to commit to allowing God to change your heart?
I think two things. One, in coming to that point of doing the full disclosure, and having Katie forgive me, and having Katie say, we'll fight this, and come alongside me and say, affirm that I'm not defined by my past, as horrible as it is, and that we can dig through it and find the real me. And so that tangible, personal, experience of grace that I was experiencing with God as well with her, and seeing that there is forgiveness beyond all of that, and then being faced with the truth again that says, no, I am not an addict. I am a child of God who has done some horrible things. I'm a child of God who has some desires that are unholy and unhealthy, and I need to reconcile and deal with those desires, deal with those feelings as a child of God, not as a recovering addict, and that sort of thing. And so turning that around to really get into that sense of who I am in God, and then, okay, no, I'm gonna live in that, and not be a perfectionist poser notion of being the righteous one, because that was what drove so much of my ministry for years and years, was that I wanted to look good. I needed to be the holy one. I had to have all the Bible answers. I had to have the proper theology so I could articulate it, even though I wasn't living in the grace that I was preaching. And so it was just that sense of twisting around my identity and addressing everything from the perspective of being in that graceful position of a child of God. Because that's the other thing, that sometimes we weaponize the grace of God in so much, and we say, well, you're a child of God, how could you consider this, right? And it's like, okay, that's all I need is more guilt and shame in my life, right? As opposed to saying, no, you're a child of God, and whatever I do doesn't change that. Even in my deepest sin, I was still a child of God.
Right.
But and so then that's like, okay, now I can start living like a child of God, because that's solid.
Yeah.
That was the biggest one.
Katie, a lot of times for the spouse who has been betrayed, the hard part of the recovery journey is when your husband is going through this transformation and you've been traumatized, you've been wounded by all of this, and all of a sudden you're faced with the patience issue. Um, where you're having to be very patient as your husband learns basically to walk again in a healthy manner, and to unlearn unhealthy manners, right? Unhealthy behaviors. What was that like for you when you realized, wow, you mean I've got to display patience and for the long haul here? What was, because I hear a lot of wives go, Lisa, wait a minute. Why should I have to have patience?
Yeah.
Why should I have to create a safe zone for my husband when he created such an unsafe zone for me? Speak into that if you would.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things. Again, this was part of, I think, the beauty of coming into this in community, because I knew up front, I'd been prepared with this whole full disclosure thing of, don't make any permanent life altering decisions for at least 6 to 12 months, because you're going to be, is a roller coaster of emotions. And so I had that in my mind. And I told Michael very clearly, I will hold space for you for at least a year, but I need to see you working that. So if you work it, I can hold space. That doesn't mean it wasn't hard. It was really hard. There were a lot of times where I would just, so much anger, so much, I knew this much. I thought there was maybe this much, but what there was like, this much when I found out the whole confession. And so I just had so much rage and so much anger, but also the most, I can't say any other thing but a supernatural grace of God literally came down upon me as I was listening to that. And like I said, Bible verses from 30, 40 years of walking with the Lord just came to me one after the other for the next several months. They just pop into my head, and I'd write them down, and pop into my head, and I'd write it down. And that carried me. It was not me. It was truly a supernatural working of the Holy Spirit. That is all I can say. Because my own emotions were sorting through the rubble and finding, oh my goodness, there's all this other junk in the rubble. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. We have to clear this out. 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 Going through and processing all of that stuff was hard. And it was a lot of work, very worth it. But I think literally it's spending time with the Lord. It was journaling every morning. it was just saying, God, I don't know where this is at, but I don't have to know. Like today, this is all I can do. And one of the things I found was our brains are always working to answer questions, right? And my brain, what I found is my brain was always would go like, why did this happen? I did this and this isn't fair. Why? Why didn't I this? Why did he this? Why? And I had to really be disciplined to say, I don't know why. This is an unanswerable question. My brain's going to keep asking that until I ask it a different question. So what I started asking myself is, what's one thing I can do today so I can be healthier tomorrow? What's one thing I can do today so I can be healthier tomorrow? Because that's a question my brain can answer.
Yep.
The other thing that really helped, honestly, was Michael. He truly embraced and owned it as much as he could. And we're talking about, no offense, but some emotional stunting there. So it was like, he didn't feel it as deeply as I wanted him to feel it.
Right.
He felt it as much as he could, but he allowed me, I'm very external in what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. And he allowed me to yell and scream and cry. I'm more of a crier than I am an angry person. I'm more of a crier, but he would just come and he learned how to just be there and hold me and let me go like that and just say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And that helped me to really get it out, because I could look at him and just say, I hate you. I can't believe you did this. And I could just get it out. And he just said, I'm so sorry. You're right.
Yeah.
And
And what
that,
I'm hearing is space that was held for both of you. You both were holding space
Mhm.
yeah,
for your healing journeys. Katie,
yeah.
let me ask you, what was it that helped you move from that pain and anger to a place of trust and forgiveness?
I don't know if there's one thing. I think that's just a process. There's just a layer, a layer, a layer. But what I will say is we talked a lot.
Mhm.
And we set up very clear expectations, very clear. He owned what he was going to do. I owned what I would and would not have. Like within this space, I'm like, this is what my system, my nervous system can tolerate and handle. This is what my mental capacity can tolerate and handle. If you can live within that, great. If you can't, well, then you'll have to go someplace else until you can.
Yeah.
And he was able to, we talked a lot. And I think as I saw him, not just doing things, but sharing and then growing and watching him grow, he is 180-degree turn from just 2 years ago. It was just 2 years ago that we had this full disclosure.
Yeah.
And knowing, I think also some of the brain damage that goes on in an addict's mind. I mean, before, and again, it's the way the Lord works. I had worked with Teen Challenge women way back when, and I knew about, how addiction,
Yeah.
they say that when you become addicted to something, your emotional development stops at that age.
Yeah.
So yeah, he might be a 50-something-year-old man, but there was a lot of emotional development that was stalled out at age 12 or 13 or 14.
And I think that's where the grace of God comes in once healing starts to take place. And I see it day in and day out where God takes someone who was so entrenched, whether it's sexual addiction or an affair, and where it has stunted that emotional capability, everything else, when true healing and freedom comes in, God picks that back up.
Mhm.
And then we see
Yes.
all of a sudden they're able to empathize where they couldn't empathize before. They're able to feel where they couldn't feel before. They're able to talk about things where they couldn't
Yeah.
before. And that's the growth that God starts to kick in. And so for y'all, you know, I know that one of the things we always talk about is when you are recovering from these things, it's important to, in order to rebuild trust, to have God honoring boundaries. And the reason why I say that is I've changed my verbiage over the last year. I used to say healthy boundaries, but however, society has taken that and used it in a way that's almost weaponizing it. And God corrected me not long ago and said, no, we create God honoring boundaries because he's the author of boundaries, right? And
That's good.
every marriage needs boundaries. Everyone needs boundaries. God created boundaries. So for you, you know, like what were some boundaries that y'all instituted as a couple to safeguard your environment for healing?
Well, for one thing that it was I was just like, there will be absolutely no inappropriate sexual anything with anybody again, or I'm out ever. It's a like no strikes.
Yeah.
Because I was like, my system cannot handle that. I cannot do it. Maybe somebody else could. I can't. Been there too long, too many years. Um, and I know a lot of people talk about lying is almost hurts more than the other part of the addiction. So we had no lying, but we really came up. We had to talk about lying. We had to talk about money. We had to talk about alcohol. We had to talk about, but the bigger thing, it wasn't the know this, it was more of the Michael put together of like, how do we want to grow? What's a growth plan of how, so I was just like, hey, these are things that I need for my whole entire nervous system and brain to heal and reset. And for us to grow, we put together things, like he said, he needed guy friends. He needed to be hanging out with some guys. He needed Bible study. He needed men's accountability group. We needed daily devotions. We needed high levels of accountability. So those were things we discussed. I don't know.
And I think one of the biggest things is, well, one, the boundaries were always open for discussion, because, early on, obviously, they were very, very rigid, very, very tight because she felt very, very unsafe. And so it was like, yeah, for the first several months, whatever, it was whatever she wanted, she got, because that's just where she was at. And then, but then as time went on, then we would come back to a couple, and obviously there were some that were obvious non-negotiables. Any of the acting out, apps on my phone, or or just any kind of inappropriate behavior, for sure. That's, but there were other things that were like, okay, what's going to, again, where we started to shift from just the rigidity of boundaries to, I have to have some freedom if I'm going to start showing trustworthiness, right? If I can't have any control over my phone, I'm not showing any trustworthiness.
Right.
And so it was like, okay, how could we slowly reintroduce things in a safe way so that she would feel comfortable, but that I could start to show my trustworthiness, I could start to grow, and so we constantly were talking about that and coming back and getting input from other people to say, okay, can we shift this, because this is feeling now more restrictive as opposed to safety and growth perspective. And so kind of constantly going back and forth of trying to understand what she would need to feel safe and secure, and what I would need to be able to grow in trustworthiness you know, and that sort of thing. So constantly just kind of going back and forth and finding those boundaries.
Well, I think, you know, and this might sound really horrible to some of your listeners, but one of the things we instituted was like a weekly check-in.
Yeah.
And they say that, you know, recovering from sexual addiction can take 3 to 5 years.
Yep.
And I was looking at, boy, this has been 33 years of marriage plus
Yeah.
whatever before that. So one of the things we did is we said there will be a polygraph every 6 months for at least the first 3 years. And then maybe once a year until we hit 5 years, and then until it's no longer needed. And so the counselors were like, oh, that's traumatic. And, you know, you shouldn't put people through that. And I was like, I don't care. What I've been through is traumatic too. And
Yeah.
like, honestly, but what that polygraph did for me and having that was it took the burden of, it allowed my system to relax. Because I knew if he's gaslighting me, if he's lying to me, if he's covering up, if I'm getting the wool pulled over my eyes again, if this is another fast one, it will get caught up. It will get found out. And so it allowed me to relax, because on that weekly check-in sheet, we had, you know, I did these devotions. I, you know, went to this group. I did this, but we also had, I did not lie to you in any way, either overtly or by omission. I was not on any computers or devices that were not connected to the accountability app. I did not have any sexual anything with anybody at any way, shape, or form, you know, and literally we still do them to this day. And they've changed though over time.
Sure.
We both sign and we date them. And I have a whole folder. And then the first 6 months, it was like, hey, it's time for that polygraph. And out comes the folder. And is every single thing in these true? Or did you misrepresent, whitewash, or omit anything?
Yeah.
And so it does hugely high. But we
And
shifted.
I'm glad you brought up the polygraph, because there are a lot of therapists and people in the professional realm that don't agree with polygraph, but I'm not one of those. I strongly agree that it is a great tool to use for both sides of the coin, for the betrayed spouse, because it helps once again to take that burden off of you, but also to regain trust as you see with each polygraph that they are on the up and up. For the unfaithful, the beauty in that polygraph is every time you take that polygraph and it is under your belt and you pass, it is once again a sign of your freedom, your integrity, the character you have built, that purity of heart that God has instituted in you. And I know one gentleman in a couple that I've spoken with, and he is getting ready to have his 3rd year. He looks forward to his polygraphs now, because he's like, for me, I look forward because it just in my own heart reaffirms what God has done for me.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so these don't have to be tools that are detrimental. I believe that they are tools that are very beneficial.
Yeah.
So let me just,
let me say something.
sure.
I feel sometimes, and she'll tell me, there's like triggers that spark her
Yeah.
thinking that I'm still doing something.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel, Katie, if sometimes, you know, you see something or whatever, but, you know, the other week, that's something hit her.
Yeah.
And it triggered, I could tell her emotions and all were kind of messed up.
Yeah.
And what we did, you know, I said, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
My phone, you want to see my phone, or let's sit down and talk about it. And that's what we did. And just trying to get everything out on the table, honey. What caused this? You know, and, you know, we worked through it.
Yeah. And I think
And
that's something
I still feel hurt that I caused it, still cause this as of today. I'm causing her to think this way sometimes.
Yeah.
And emotionally, it just tears me
Mhm.
apart. And I'm sure it does you too,
Yeah.
brother.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Thanks for sharing that, because that's exactly what we found
Yeah.
is Michael's willingness to own some of the fact that some of these behaviors will still cause a trigger in me, and his
Mhm.
willingness to own those and sit down and talk about them. And now it's at a point where it just reassures me it's okay. Or maybe it's like, he might say, yeah, I don't know why I did that, and it causes him to think, and I think I was thinking this or going through that, and that it's just been,
Mhm.
I think that willingness of a husband to own those things. So many times I feel like, I don't want to have a marriage where we're just tiptoeing around and trying not
Right.
to trigger each other. Like,
Right.
no, I want to get to the bottom of those triggers and root them out and be done with them.
Well, there's one other question that I want to kind of ask you both before I really want you to kind of speak to each side of the coin here, the betrayed and the unfaithful spouse. But ultimately, any couple that we work with, or the women inside of the group coaching programs, what have you, one of the most difficult topics to deal with after betrayal is to reestablish intimacy in the relationship. It's one of the most difficult because, just like Britt said and Katie, you said, is because, we can get triggered at any moment. Things can kind of flashback or what have you. But for both of you, what do you believe? And I want to hear from both of you on this, okay? What do you believe helped to restore that intimacy, to be able to connect once again as a married couple inside of that biblical marriage, to reestablish your covenant, right? That sexual intimacy is so important, and it's very difficult, of course, at first, but you're 2 years in. What do you believe helped to restore that for you guys?
Um, well, I think for me, just the grace that she shared with me, just that complete sense of love and acceptance, even though, we're still going through the hard times and still working through some of those kinds of issues. That was really powerful, because again, even for me all along, the intimacy between us was always difficult, because I never felt worthy. I mean, I was carrying in the guilt and the shame of my behavior. I was carrying in the lies that I wasn't worthy of being loved. I was carrying in the fear that she's going to find out and reject me, so she doesn't really love me. She loves whatever image of me I've created. And so I think in having the truth all laid out and knowing that she was still walking alongside me and fighting for me was really probably the biggest piece on my side of being beginning to grow in that intimacy. And that's still one of those emotional development things of my brain damagedness that I'm learning of what does that mean? What does healthy intimacy even mean? But I think those were the key pieces for me of just knowing at that deeper level of intimacy, of being loved, fully loved and accepted for who I am and what I've done regardless.
Yeah. And I think, like, for me, it almost like, because he had been living in such shame, I felt just like rejected, like, okay, obviously doesn't want me, obviously I don't know what's wrong with me, whatever, of coming to understand the fear and the shame, and then again communicating. I mean, like, I remember once, this was pretty early on, being on the couch and I'm sitting there crying, you know, and whatever. And he's kind of just sitting kind of like this. And I was just like, this is what I need. Just let me do like taking his literally put it. And he was like, okay, you know, and going like having to like be like, don't be afraid. Like you have to show me, like, I need this. And saying that. And yeah, we'll
And
start
I think
feelings
that's,
chart.
yeah, Katie, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of times couples, both sides, men and women, have the tendency to think, well, we've been married for so long, they should know these things, right? But the truth of the matter is, unless we tell them, how will they know?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need to share our deep desires and dreams and our needs and our wants. And it's okay to look at our spouse and say, I just need you to hold me, right?
Mhm.
I just need you to tell me you love me, right?
Mhm.
And when we are that vulnerable, which can be hard in the early stages, but as we heal, when we can start to be vulnerable once again, that connects us spiritually, emotionally, and ultimately physically once again. And that's what I'm hearing that both of you were able to do.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the the other part of it too, because like early on too, I think because of my betrayal, she wanted me to pursue her and show my interest, but in my recovery, I didn't know how to do that. I felt unworthy. I felt, and so again, just being able to talk about that, and we again, like you said, I think so many couples we just feel, well, it should just flow naturally. Well, that's just such, it just doesn't happen that way. Not if,
Hollywood.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, so we were able to talk and say, hey, it's hard, it's scary for me to initiate, so how can I do that, or what, and you need to help me. And so again, kind of sharing that, like you said, that vulnerability of, here's my fears, here's where I'm trying to come from, help me to overcome. And just, yeah, just kind of sharing the needs and the fears and all of that.
When I
Yeah.
think with that too, one thing his therapist said, like really early on, I think it was like when he was reading me his letter of amends, was he was like, Katie, what do you need from him? What do you need to know? And after a couple, deeper, one layer deeper, we got down to, I said, I need to know that I'm worth it and I'm worth fighting for. Like that I'm worth him going through the work of, I'm worth fighting for. And so, he looked at Michael and he said, anytime you guys are arguing about anything at all, he's like, you just take a time out. He's like, you just go over to her, you hug her and you hold her and you tell her that you're worth it. And that was a huge, huge, good piece of advice.
Yeah, 100%. So for the couples who are listening and feeling, a lot of that hopelessness because they've either recently just found out on D-Day about betrayal. Katie, for you, for the wife who has had all of this truckload of concrete just dumped out on her, what words of encouragement could you give her in right now to kind of breathe a little bit of hope and life into her?
One of the verses God gave to me early on was out in Micah, Malachi? Anyway, Malachi, and it says, rejoice not over me, O my enemy, for though I fall, I will rise again. And though I dwell in darkness, the Lord will be a light for me. And hold on to the promises of God. And you are stronger than you know, because you have the God of the universe who made you, formed you before you were ever even a twinkle in your mom and dad's eye. You were formed with a purpose and for a reason, and he knows you and he sees you and he's right there with you. And you don't ever have to go this alone, because you have the strength of a God who loves you to lean on. and he will carry you. And I think the most meaningful Easter I've ever been through was about a month after this full disclosure, was on Good Friday. And I sat and I felt the pain and the sting of the betrayal. And I meditated on Jesus and how much betrayal he went through. Those closest to him, his own father, of turning his face away from him, you know, the people who shouted how great he was one moment and turned around and stabbed him literally the next. And realizing that you're not in it alone, and no matter what happens, whether your husband chooses to dig in and fight and change like Michael did, and I'm so proud of him for doing that, or whether he is just too stuck in his own denial or issues or whatever, that doesn't determine your worth.
Amen.
Your worth is determined by God. You are a princess. You are a daughter of the living God, and you will get through this, and you will get to the other side. Just keep pressing in.
Amen.
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing
Oh.
that. And to the woman who is listening right now, I really, really want you to take to heart everything that Katie just said. This is not your fault. You did nothing to cause this. And you are worth being loved, being cherished, having someone to be loyal to you, and trust God with yourself, because no matter what, He will see you through. So, Michael, I would love for you to speak to the men right now who may be struggling with addiction. They have been told that they are going to struggle with this the rest of their lives. They may be even hiding some things still from their wives, and they feel like, well, that's the best thing to do because I won't hurt her. I'd really love for you to share your heart right now to them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, it's just so true. You know, there's no healing and there's no growth where there isn't light. And it's got to come into the light. You've got to bring it from the darkness into the light to get forgiven, and you know, to put it to death and to be able to grow again. You've just got to. You've got to reach out to some other people. There's a right way to bring it into the light, and so reach out to people who can help you with that sort of disclosure. Don't just go start dumping on your wife, but get some help in it so it's done in a loving and proper way. But yeah, there is hope. There is hope. You know, the lies are there is no hope. You'll never change. You know, the lie that this is natural, it isn't. It isn't. It is unnatural. It is a twisting of our nature and our God-given design. And it's not just, well, this is what we are, we do as guys. That is not true. And that's what society has tried to teach us, and it isn't true at all. And so there is hope. There's a better way, and it is so worth it to get that freedom and it's just you know, the weight that comes off your shoulders when you're walking in the truth, and the freedom of that is so just incredible. And regardless of what it may cost you, and you know, not every story ends like ours, but it will end in health, in greater health and greater healing. You know, the whole sense of just living that lie. And you know, it's interestingly, so you shared earlier about the way you talk about marriage and, you know, recreating that. I can't remember the exact words you used, but yeah, it's not, we're not rebuilding the old marriage, because our old marriage was based on so many lies. We're we're creating a new marriage, and that's based on that truth. And that's, you know, so the deception and the keeping the secrets isn't just keeping your own secrets safe. It's keeping the lie of your marriage safe. And you want to just break free of that. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest ones that I would say with regards to holding on to that. And The other thing I would say is uh, reject the lie that it doesn't mean anything. It means the world to everyone. Yeah, it means the world to your wife, what you're doing. The notion that it doesn't hurt anyone is such a lie on so many levels. I mean, the human trafficking side of things, is just horrific, but it does matter. And the fact that your wife doesn't know or other people don't know doesn't change the pain and the hurt that you're causing already. The fact that they don't know about it doesn't mean the wounds aren't there, and it does matter, and it matters to you of what you're doing to yourself as well. And so those would be the things of just really needing to bring it out and find people that you can reach out to help that process of coming forward and sharing it. It's just so important.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. That is so beautifully said. And I'm glad you mentioned just the pornography industry in general. And there's just such a darkness that most people don't recognize in that industry. And for those of you listening, I recently did a podcast on is pornography and masturbation considered cheating inside of a biblical marriage? And so below in the show notes, make sure you click on that link and you take a listen to it, because it will reveal the dark side of the pornography industry and how it is damaging to everybody involved, including the unfortunate children and young adults who are sex trafficked into that industry. And we want to bring light into that on this podcast, because we want to bring truth so that you can be set free, and those who have been captive for so long in this industry can finally be set free. So Michael, Katie, thank you both for being here. You have blessed us, and I know that all of the listeners who are here with us today and all across the globe have been so blessed by your story. It's one of courage, it's one of redemption, but most of all, it just explodes with God's glory. So I just want to thank you so very, very much.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honor to be able to
Yo.
share.
Yeah. And thank you for being there for me, Lisa. You're one of the reasons, and your particular approach that says, look, it's not in secular counseling, it's not in just inner healing prayers. It's we need the Lord to break us free. And thank you for being a faithful friend and a faithful prayer warrior. And
oh, honey, what a privilege it's been to me to be here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you're right. We have to have a holistic approach. Jesus healed mind, body, and spirit. And
amen.
so unless we handle both sides, the flesh and the spiritual realm, a person cannot be completely healed. And so that's what we will always seek to do, is to follow the example of our Savior, because he is the master healer after all. So
Amen.
thank you all for
Thank
listening
you.
to Beauty
Thank
Beyond
you.
Betrayal. It's just, again, been a privilege to be with each and every one of you today. Look for us again very, very soon with some more interviews, and look for this couple more often. I have the feeling they'll be around for a while. So y'all be
That's right.
blessed, and we'll
All right.
see you again soon on Beauty Beyond Betrayal.